Arts and story sharing have always opened new avenues for imagining possible futures. From the earliest innovations in perspective onward through the abstract evocations and multimedia representations of the many facets of life, society, culture, and emotion, art has prompted conversations about humanity and where we're heading next. With so many arts projects on hold at the moment, and the simultaneous increase in focus on equity and inclusion, multimedia and the media arts are enabling the continuation of collaborations that connect community and prompt change. How are artists and community organizations working together to create new opportunities for careers in the AV and media arts worlds? And how can public art foster more connections through multimedia? Hello, and welcome back to the Tide Generator podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten Nelson. And today we're here to talk about some of the most important constants in a time of great change, the arts and community. When you connect those with multimedia technology and the media arts, when you connect all those things together, that you can create opportunities for change and connection. And we really want to discuss that and where we can go and what we can build when we create and foster new interactions between arts, community, and technology. So here with me to chat about that are my two guests. I have with me Chris Hope. He is executive director and co-founder of the Loop Lab. Hello.
Hi, Kirsten. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And I also have Elisa Hamilton. She is a socially engaged multimedia artist and creator of the Jukebox public art project for the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hi.
Hi, Kirsten.
Hello. Welcome. Yeah, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I'm really excited about the Jukebox project and your collaboration and everything that it means and what you've both always done in the arts and community, the efforts you're making and what's coming next. So yeah, you both have a history of connecting with the community through multimedia and the media arts. And I think I wanted to start with Chris. Basically, you've been working together on this Jukebox project, but also in this time of with everything being kind of paused and reset and deadlines being changed, Chris, you still managed to have a cohort graduate from the Loop Lab in all of this. So I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about how you've been trying to keep everything going in this time and talk about how we can, keep connecting through this time through the organization of the Loop Lab?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, COVID presented many challenges to the AV industry at large and also to the world. For me as an executive leader, I often look at these things as acknowledging and validating the pain and suffering and the obstacles that are ahead of us as a society. And at the same time, as an innovator, having to look at where are the opportunities in the midst of these challenges. So early on, when at least in Boston, Massachusetts, when the lockdown happened in March, we readily moved to an online curriculum. And I was able to have several conversations with the students to see if they would still be comfortable going through our program in the midst of so many uncertainties in society, and they were committed to finishing. And this is a huge acknowledgement to their maturity, to their grit, and to their passion and drive for success. And so they decided to stick with us and stick with the program. We moved everything overnight to a virtual format, thanks to an amazing program manager, Matt Malakowski, huge shout out. And we were able to successfully steward our handful of students through the year online. In addition to that being the case and successfully graduating them, because we were no longer limited to a physical space, we said to ourselves, is there an opportunity here to create virtual programming? And so through that experience, we were able to start offering programming to the high schools and through the different cities in Boston, outside of Boston, including Cambridge, to really offer workforce development programming in media arts and also in AV for 13 to 18-year-olds. And so we went from essentially in 1 year graduating typically 10 students a year to now having already served 50 this year alone. And so it's been an amazing opportunity. It's allowed us to hire more staff, more contractors. And so at a time where, unfortunately, many nonprofits and education institutions are suffering, we're actually, in a sense, emerging and growing. And so I just want to encourage folks out there to continue to want to validate their suffering, validate the challenges, and also encourage folks to look at the opportunities that are in the midst of what we have as a post-COVID reality.
Yeah, there ends up being a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of possibility that ends up coming from some of these pauses and delays and changes. And luckily it's enabled by technology.
Yeah.
That makes me think of what Elisa was telling us about the Jukebox project. It was always meant to be an expansive project where you're creating opportunity for story sharing that would be expansive and could grow, and the files of stories could be added and changed. And now that the timeline of the project has shifted, it sounds like the technology actually has been a benefit to be able to have a longer timeline. Yeah, you want to talk about how basically technology has ended up kind of creating a continuation of what you're trying to do with the Jukebox project?
Yeah, I think that, technology has kind of always been at the heart of the Jukebox project, right? It makes it what it is. It's a story sharing project. It's a project about connection and building community through sharing stories and through hearing stories told by community members. And so I think, for the Jukebox project, it's changed a little bit of our approach to outreach. And, like Chris is saying, wow, we're super lucky that technology exists, that the project doesn't have to be put on hold, because this is a really critical time for the project where it's important to be having community conversations and dialogue. It's important for folks to start to know that this project is happening and it's for them. And there's going to be this jukebox that, their neighbors can be on and they can be on. And so I feel really grateful and excited that, the Loop Lab has just been so responsive to community needs, and it makes me feel very fortunate that the Jukebox has such an agile partner in this work so that we can adapt to our current moment. And the project, it's not on hold. It can still move forward even though we can't be physically together right now, it is also very much what Jukebox is about. It's about listening together. But that isn't necessary, in a physical space right now to be able to do that. So yeah, that's a little bit about how the Loop Lab has helped make the project able to move forward even in this really hard time.
And I'll add to that, the funny thing about the Jukebox project in of itself is, I often use the framework that some things are devices for others, right? So on the surface, the Loop Lab, yes, we're a nonprofit where we have workforce development training, but it's really a device to empower young adults of color and young women to become more self-effective in their holistic lives. And I think similarly with the Jukebox, on the surface, you have an amazing physical construct that is really there to store these stories so that they can be shared. But that's really a device for community building and communications. And this ties in with AV because, as we all know, AV is rooted in the principle of the enhancement of communication experiences. And that's exactly what we're doing with this project with Elisa and the city of Cambridge. Huge shout out to the city of Cambridge as well, to really enhance the communication, community building that comes from story sharing. Stories run the world, and those stories should not stop all because we have another lockdown. Community building shouldn't stop because we're having a lockdown and because of the current climate that we're facing politically and also biologically. Things have to keep moving, and at the end of the day, the late Joseph Campbell would tell you that stories make this world go round, right? Political activist Marshall Gans will tell you the power of storytelling and story sharing that can change the destinies of entire nations. And that's what we're really looking to do with this project, with the Jukebox, is really enable people to have equal access to share their stories and to build community around that.
And I think another really exciting part of the process of Jukebox is this idea of process. So with COVID, we're still developing the ways we're going to be collecting these stories, but there's such an opportunity to build community through acts of creation. And so that's something that I'm really excited about also, is to, the empowerment that comes with, utilizing technology and creating opportunities for folks to show up and record and record together. I think that there is, that co-creation and leaning into process is something that I thought a lot about in developing this project. Like Chris said, like, it is the physical jukebox, but it's so much more than that. And I think that the best public art projects offer that opportunity for participants to engage in multiple levels throughout the creation and the the interaction with the project itself.
Yeah, maybe we should take a step back and talk about how you ended up working together, because I know, Elisa, you had some of your works before this were adding music and multimedia elements and connecting community that way. And I know that when you were starting the Jukebox, when you started developing it, you were looking for a partner in the community who also had the same notions for how the media arts can connect people. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this all happened, how you ended up working together?
Sure. I love this story because I just, every time I think about it, I'm just like, I can't believe this happened. It was so great. Yeah. So I was chosen as, I was selected. So the process, it was a public process to choose the artist who would create the public art for the Cambridge Foundry, which is what Jukebox is. So I was selected as one of 3 finalists and given a couple months to develop a proposal. And the RFP, was so thoughtfully written. Lillian Sue at the Cambridge Arts Council, she is just so thoughtful about the way she thinks about each public art project and what community it serves and what the needs of that community is. And in my conversations with community members and at public meetings and with city folks, I was finding that there was a real want for not just a public art project that people would look at, but a public art project that people would interact with and could be programmatic as well as visual. And I work with storytelling a lot in my work. It's a critical part of a lot of the projects that I do. And when I started to develop ideas for how this might take shape, I reached out to the Cambridge Arts Council and I said, do you know any organizations who are working in community, are doing, audio stuff, or, and the Loop Lab came up, and we had an email introduction. This was back in the old days when we could go see somebody. And I showed up and I met with Matt and Chris for, I was there for like 3 hours. Yes. And they show me their space, which was they are moving spaces right now, and Chris can talk more about that. But this was a space, it was like 700 square feet or something. Right. That space right. was so well utilized. There were like 8 different computer setups and a sound booth. And I walked into this space and I was like, this is amazing. And I just threw every idea that I had at them. And we just kicked ideas around. And when I left, I knew it would be a jukebox, and I knew that we would be working together. And that was even before, and then it was the hard work of sort of like, well, how is it going to work? And am I going to make it from scratch? Like, how does this, but knowing that I had such an amazing community partner, who was already embedded in the community, who shared such similar values as I did as a creator, but also the values of the project, which were around access and creating a platform that would amplify community voices. Like, that was the thing for me that made me know that that I could do this project and that it would be a success. And we're doing it, and it will be.
Yeah. Jazz hands. I will say that Elisa did a wonderful job, really getting people's perspectives in the community, kind of like having fireside chats, and instead of parachuting her own notions or presuppositions of what the community wanted or where this project necessarily would land. She did a great job just talking to different community agencies, citizens, and again, working with people like Lillian Sue, Jason Weeks at Cambridge Arts, huge shout out to Cambridge Arts, to really get a better sense of, where this project was going to land or go. And so I really tip my hat off to her.
That's so kind. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I feel like there's this tremendous overlap to the commitment to gathering and connecting the voices of the community, and hearing about the Loop Lab and this amazing amount of stuff you can physically cram into the space. But it's also with the idea of the notion of the very many possibilities and pathways that you're trying to open up with the Loop Lab. Maybe we should talk about that too. Like when you founded the organization, it was about, creating opportunity and connecting people through their love and passion for the media arts. You want to talk about?
That's right. Yeah. So, I started the Loop Lab with another, actually a mentee of mine, Moses Michelle. Shout out to Moses. And we started it really as a response to some of the unfortunate situations we find, what we call opportunity youth, which are young adults from the ages of 17 to 26 years old, who are either not in college or they're chronically unemployed. And so the question becomes is like this group or demographic is really at risk for going into jail, going to prison, infectious diseases, you name it. It runs the spectrum, criminal violence, drug dealing. And so we just tried to create something that really spoke to this demographic, and it's just really expanded beyond that. So the Loop Lab, we have essentially a creative workforce nonprofit curriculum that is dedicated in empowering young adults of color and women to get into the audio video industry. And so that could look like the professional media arts industry when we talk about news broadcasting, professional live streaming, or even talking about the pro AV industry when we talk about AV installation. In addition to that, other aspects of the AV industry itself. But but aside from that, we also do a lot of focus on life skills, financial education, and financial literacy, what it's like to be a contract consultant, filling out those W-9s and submitting those, and 1099s, understanding all the things that go into being taxed as a consultant. Those are not necessarily traditional skills that are taught or trained in a workforce development program, but still within our field is highly critical and highly important for one's success. And so I will also share that, we've since grown to do high school programming. Actually, this year, we also are going to be launching a brand new apprenticeship, actually the only apprenticeship in the state of Massachusetts for pro AV careers. That's very exciting because we just got the sponsorship from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I say all that to say this is that creating opportunities is one side, but on the other side is really talking about the avenues of creating opportunities for women and people of color in these industries. And so when we talk about the Jukebox, we're hiring our alumni who have graduated the program, starting at $18 an hour all the way up to $22.5 an hour to do this work, to go into to do the audio field recordings, to interview folks, to actually create the content for this amazing project for a world-renowned multimedia artist like Elisa. And that's an amazing. I'm proud. I'm speaking it up. I'm speaking it into existence. But I mean, these are opportunities that are being created in real time, and these are also, I would say, for the industry, you don't often see people of color in these roles of doing the audio work or doing the video work, right? You often do not see that. I have to say, definitely with the pro AV space, especially, it is mostly older white men that you see in their polos and polo shirts, and that's cool. And we want to be able to create avenues for other people to effectively work, be able to feed themselves and their families and build their portfolios out. And I think stories is really critical way to do that. As an organization rooted in, content creation and storytelling, effective stories really compel us to make emotional decisions, right? And you can change government policy with stories. You can have someone elected, either fortunately or unfortunately with stories. And so the levels of gatekeeping that goes into, unfortunately, who gets to be in these roles to create content really is pretty strong, unfortunately. And I think it's a strong thermometer to determine the health of a democracy. And unfortunately, in the US, I find that there's data that suggests, though, in much of our media arts and pro AV industries, a lot of that gatekeeping has been pretty oppressive. When we talk about excluding minorities, excluding women from who gets to actually create this content. So I think that on a broader level, this is really critical what we're doing. Although we're acting locally, we're thinking globally, as they say. And yeah.
Yeah, and I would jump in and I would say, like, it's such, this is a city-funded project. Jukebox is, it's a percent for art, public art project. So I think, I love that public funding from this project is being infused back into a community organization. I just think that what more could you want from public funding, It's being, delegated to this public art that's for community, being made with community, and it's being infused back into the community. It's like, yes.
It's the loop.
It's the loop.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think that's what definitely this conversation needs to be an ongoing conversation. I think we were talking about that too, like the power of story and being able to connect as you've connected on this project. But we've definitely talked about, the change that needs to happen within Pro AV and just the world in general is trying to have a more inclusive conversation. And I think we were talking a little bit about creating starting with the leadership. Like how can we start and keep this conversation going? And I think we have to begin with leadership and how they're starting to look at who is participating, how those gatekeepers can actually make change happen. And I think adaptability, I think, is what we ended up landing on as the way to the future. I don't know, Chris, do you want to talk about how where we can begin in trying to change the way things are done and the kinds of hiring practices and the kinds of work that's done in the AV industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it becomes a moral imperative for leaders in the pro AV industry to really start thinking more intentional about some of their internal practices, hiring practices, biases that individuals can have on the management level. When you look around and everyone looks like you, that's not a good sign. Even as myself, as a quote unquote boss, I work in a very multiracial organization. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds. And so but that's intentional. And it takes a lot of effort to go into one's bias. And so I think allowing more access internally for bias training, understanding equity, really needs to happen and to be held accountable. So going to third-party consultants for that kind of work. Another part of it is being intentional to support organizations like the Loop Lab, like other entities that are really trying to create work pipelines for the pro AV industry, essentially to really demonstrate your support. And I think that the biggest way that you can demonstrate your support, aside from giving advice and giving some time, is really with your wallet, right? Put your money where your mouth is. And I think that with the wealth and abundance that many of the pro AV industries, companies have in the industry, it really becomes imperative that they help fund these pipelines to become more equitable, and that people are learning and they're gaining the skills needed to be successful in the industry. Another part I will add, and I think I'll end here, is being also more intentional about where people can see representation in the pro AV industry. Oftentimes you go on YouTube or Vimeo and you see tutorials essentially of, people doing, for example, building a rack, or demonstration tutorials of how someone is essentially doing some live audio mixing, or another one where you see somebody going through the motions of, doing something else. And oftentimes it's older white men. And I think that's a challenge because, for our students, many of them are second generation Americans coming from Guatemala, coming from Haiti, coming from all over. And it's difficult that they don't see people that look like them doing these roles, right? Doing these really displaying and demonstrating these skills.
Well, that actually makes me think of Elisa's part of this story too, is how do stories actually continue to create those access? We're talking about making sure that the people who are represented in these videos are actually representational of the world and a little bit more inclusive in terms of who they're showing as part of the world. But yeah, how do you see multimedia supporting, actually creating a vision and creating more equity in who gets to share their stories?
Yeah, I think that I agree with Chris. I mean, I think that some of it is really systemic changes that need to happen, and those really need to happen at the top. Those need to happen. We need those CEOs, those presidents, those politicians to step up and fund opportunities and create more access. And I do want to share, one example from my past where that actually happened for me. My first technology art piece was a sound piece. It was called Sound Lab, and I had never worked in sound before. I'd been collaborating with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and they were planning this sound show called Listen Here. And even though I'd never worked in sound before, they'd seen my work as a community artist, and they knew that if they gave me the resources and the support to be able to create a community project with sound, that I could make something impactful. And I did. I worked with 4 local community partner organizations in Roxbury, Mission Hill, and Jamaica Plain, and recorded their sounds and created this sound lab that featured their sounds. They came to the museum. They taught workshops on performance. And I think that there's so many artists who could benefit from that kind of opportunity. So many artists of color, who are working in public art, who are doing socially engaged art, who just need the resources and the opportunity and support to be able to take their community work to the next level and engage with communities using technologies and create this empowering work. So yeah, I would ask institutions, organizations, technology partners to step up, set aside some funding, identify some artists of color who are doing, work that's exciting, and maybe not in a technology space, and say, we believe in you, like make something. And because that has been a critical part of, my success as an artist. And now technology is something that I utilize consistently. And before that opportunity, I never would have thought that that was something that I could utilize in my own work.
Yeah, I think having more voices in general in all media and all arts is going to make the stories better and more meaningful and create more connection. I know, Chris, you had mentioned a little bit talking about some of the work you're doing with the film industry too, and trying to have a more equitable opportunities in that field. You want to talk about what you're trying to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. I participate in essentially a kind of a working group to really bring more equity and to minorities and people of color in the film industry. And we work with the state of Massachusetts and their MA film department. Massachusetts has its own film office. And to be honest, the film industry, not only in Massachusetts, but also I think nationally, just still hasn't had what I call like a come to Jesus moment, right? It still hasn't thrown up its hands in repentance. People of color and women are still grossly underrepresented in the film industry. And, having sat on this like diversity working group, you see the challenges there with the unions and all of the other organizations that intersect. And so I think that when we talk about the pro AV industry, one thing that I think, even though there has been progress and there's much more to happen. I think what the AV industry has gotten right is labor organizations like Avixa, huge shout out to our partner Avixa, but also CEDIA. They have amazing diversity councils that have already started to influence some of the policies around the entire industry around why this is important, and by bringing the leadership of different companies to the table and really taking them to task. And I think that similarly, you know, the film industry would be really benefited from an approach where, you know, you create space to advocate for policy changes, to build more networks where people can essentially speak truth to power and really instigate some change. I think that, you know, I talked about representation earlier. That only happens when people see the inherent value of having different types of people in film, and unfortunately this becomes like a values issue, not so much a issue based on whether or not anyone wants to harm other people. I think this is really about what we value as human beings and what we think markets value. And unfortunately, when we make the decision that people don't want to see, for example, a Black film that's produced by Black people, that's making a value judgment. It's making a value statement. And we all know that the data doesn't lie. I mean, minority-made films have had great success in the industry, and it's possible.
That makes me think of access and creating more connections and making sure that artists have the opportunity to realize their vision. Do you feel like is there an opportunity for artists to connect with more technology partners and have their stories told? Is this the moment where we can finally get more voices that way?
I mean, I hope so. I think that, you know, I'm finding in my own life that I'm looking in my circles and people are ready to listen in a way that they haven't been before. Like this is a huge moment of reckoning for our country on so many levels. And I think that that there's a willingness I'm seeing especially white allies to do the work, to be allies, to talk less and listen more. And I think that that's absolutely an opportunity. And in terms of, you know, access for artists, I would just reiterate what I said before, and that's just that, you know, there are so many untapped possibilities in terms of art and technology. And, you know, I think that sometimes folks, I know this has been true for me as an artist, you need somebody from the outside to say, the work that you're doing is important. And
that's right.
Like, we want to support you. Like, how can we support you? So I think that that's something that, especially in this time of isolation, you know, I think artists really need that right now. They really need that right now. At the beginning of the pandemic, I felt like I was getting all these, you know, surveys from arts organizations that were like, how much money have you lost? How bad is it for you? And I was like, this is so traumatic. Like, this isn't what I need. Like, I need an organization to send me an email being like, keep working. Your work is important. Mm-hmm. This is how we're going to support you in your work. This is the platform that we're providing for you in your work. And this is how you can share your platform with other people and with artists and community members. So I think that that there's a shift that needs to happen with that conversation around sort of like, you know, I think it's great to ask artists what they need, but sometimes, you know, we don't always know what we need because we don't know our own power. So I think that there's just a huge opportunity for, you know, for institutions, organizations, technology partners to say, you, and you too, like, let's make something together.
Wow. Yeah. Well, your work is important, and I think I think that
Thank you for having us.
yeah. Well, that's why I get so excited talking with you both, because story sharing is the future, and I think more inclusive story sharing is what we're all aiming for now. And I guess maybe by way of wrapping up, we could talk about that. You know, how do you feel that story sharing is the future, and how does that connect for you in terms of the technology that actually enables that in a more egalitarian way now?
I mean, I think it's about listening, right? I think it's about recognizing the power of our stories. Jukebox is grounded in the belief that by sharing our stories, we develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and of each other. And like, that's it in a nutshell. So if that's true, then story sharing should be a part of the fabric of like everything we do. It should be, an inherent part of the way we think about community building, and the way we think about public access, and the way we think about, creating, equitable frameworks. And I think that it's just like such a powerful mode of connection.
Yeah, Chris, how do you see story sharing as the future? Yeah.
I would say it's not just the future, it's our past, it's our present. I mean, our entire lives, the entire civilization is based on stories. People, create their ideas about reality and faith based on stories, whether it's about Jesus or Muhammad or whoever. People make their decisions on what car they're going to buy based on a story or stories, who they're going to marry. All of those things are critical to the essence of who we are as human beings. And I put his name out there again. The late Joseph Campbell is somebody who really emphasized this, right? And so similarly, as we're talking about story sharing through Jukebox, it's bringing people together. It's building that sense of community, and that's needed now more than ever, that we have so many things that are dividing us as Americans, and so many political beliefs and stories that are bringing us apart, pulling us apart rather than bringing us together. And so I think that being able to see the other in the self, which is an inherent desire for a healthy relationship and for a healthy society, is something that will definitely come out of that. No matter what that person's background is, I'm sure they've at one point been disappointed in their lives. I'm sure at one point they felt severe pain or joy in their lives. And there was a moment that they had with their parent that touched them to the depths of their soul. I mean, people can relate to certain universal realities that we just share as human beings. And I think that those are the things that through using audio and video technology, we can enhance to communicate these powerful narratives and share them to others so that they can feel closer together rather than apart.
I love that.
Yeah, that's truly it. That's it. It's the connection, being able to connect to others through like, the collective notion of emotions, the fact that we all feel them and we can all connect, via stories, and any kind of evocative connection we can make there can prompt change. So yeah, this work is important.
It is. And it's a reason why we're definitely doing this with Elisa, because there is a need for community building, especially now in this time. Because and as far as our mission of really advancing equity, we can hit people over the head with all the data we want, right? The fact that only 4.3% of like the 1,200 directors behind the top grossing films last year were women. That should be a shameful statistic or data. But I think even more powerful would be creating a video or audio story that compels the human heart to say, you know what, there's something about creating opportunities for people's voices to be heard that normally don't get heard, because it brings another dimension to our lives. And I think that with Jukebox, that's what we're doing. We're bringing dimensions to each other's lives, but we're not parachuting our notions of what the story should be told. Mm-hmm. That's going to be up to the people that are participating in this. And that's why I think Elisa is a genius in her approach and how she's really moving forward with this project. And one of the reasons why I know that our team is very excited, and our students are largely excited to be a part of this.
That is it. That's the ultimate connection created by multimedia and the arts. It's just like everyone gets that ecstatic feeling of really making meaning and really causing, like, bringing change and continuing the conversation. And I think we're all our whole audience is going to be excited to see what happens with the Jukebox as it starts to share stories with the world and keeps adding.
It's moving, and it's great
happening.
energy.
We're doing it. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's already happened.
Chugging forward, slow and mighty.
All right. Well, that's the way to win the race for sure. So yeah. All right. Well, wow. Thank you so much for talking with us about this. I'm so excited about everything that's possible through storytelling and through multimedia. So I'm glad. I'm going to keep up and keep following up with you, finding out what's going on with this project. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. This has been such a delightful conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirsten, and for Tide for creating a platform for us.
Thanks for listening to the Tide Generator podcast, produced by Avixa. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.